Okay, I think we are now live. So hi, it's great to see you guys here. So if you could just let me know where you're joining from. So a little bit about your background, maybe your school, maybe your, obviously your name, what's your role within the school, whether you're secondary, what languages maybe you're teaching, just to get the conversation a little bit going, maybe to get to know you. So I'm gonna have a look at what I can see in the chat. Just get the chat up. Right, lovely to see you people. Great to see you again. Yeah, lovely chat. Oh, I can see. So we've got Indonesia. We've got hi, Sylvia. I met you on Monday online, Claire. Bosta. Lovely to see you. Yes, Claire. I can see some people. Swahili. Got Emma, Inverness, lovely. So it would be great if you could put where you're joining from, what your role is, something about your school, Sydney, Australia. Wow. So we're very international today. Lovely to see so many people. It's a lovely Saturday. It's very sunny here where I'm in Cheshire. So it's great to see so many people joining in. I can see that the session is quite popular. Over 300 people signed in. Somerset, okay, Mandarin, interesting. Well, I'm gonna wait probably about another minute or so for people to join in, and then we'll make a start. Epping, Essex, wow, very varied. Okay, Scotland, interesting. France, great to see everybody. Great that you're giving up your afternoon, especially that it's sunny here in England. We don't get it very often that sunny, especially this time of the year, because the week was not very nice. Great to see everybody. And I'll give it another minute and then we'll make a start. I think I can see more people joining in. Okay, it's great because these sessions, you can all watch them again on demand, when you can't make it, because there's so many interesting sessions. It's difficult to choose what to watch, but it's great that you can rewatch it at your leisure anytime afterwards. It's got a few more messages. Got Clarice from East Sussex. Okay, excellent. Right, okay, I think I'm going to make a start now. Okay, so let me just share my screen with you. Okay, if I go to the start and I come into presenting. Okay, so my session today will be about affecting questioning in language classroom. We will be looking at some techniques and some strategies and ideas and resources. If I could ask you that you maybe post all of your questions into the Q&A section, I tend to really probably speak about for 40 minutes, maybe 35 minutes, depending how many questions appear in a Q&A section. And then I will be answering your questions at the end, if that's okay with you, because I think it's going to be easier for me to do so. It's not needed to be said that obviously questioning is really important, not just obviously in languages classroom, but in the teaching as part of our strategy or methodology anyway. So all subject domains really, in the curriculum rely on questioning, and languages are not any different. But a little bit about my background, first of all, who I am and what I do. I am subject leader, experienced subject leader. I've been leading my department since 2011. But mainly I'm a teacher, and the language that I teach is German. My experience is predominantly from the secondary sector, but I taught in the past a little bit of Spanish. I also worked as an SLE for modern phonic languages, for the people who are maybe not so familiar with the UK educational system. It's kind of like advisory consultancy role where you are then deployed to consult with schools on school improvement or department improvement. I also am a research lead for my school, so I lead the research group and research into education pedagogy and how can we apply it in a classroom on a practical level. I also am GCSE examiner. So again, for the people who are maybe not familiar with the British school system, GCSEs is a qualification our students gain at the end of secondary education when they're 16. And I'm an examiner for the EdExcel exam board for the writing, specifically higher writing. Fellow of Chartered College of Teaching. I'm also Association for Language Learning Council member. So if you are not the member of the association, I really strongly recommend that you join. because through joining, you get access to a lot of free CPD, but also access to lots of resources and really great network, in terms of support. So I will share with you a slide at the end where there is a QR code. If interested, you can join. You don't have to be UK based to join. There is various different types of memberships. The primary one, which often people get a little bit confused with, it doesn't mean that you teach in a primary school. It just means that it's a small department membership. So, when you don't have a lot of people within the department, and it's a really good value. And most recently, I have been also employed as a German expert mentor through the Goethe Institute. If you are not familiar with the initiative, it is part of the NCLE group. At the moment, obviously, there is a big initiative and push for improving the situation in languages in the UK, mainly in English state schools in England. And specifically, the Gimagine project, which is run by the Goethe Institute, is trying to deal with the situation of German in English schools, which is quite on the decline. So the German expert mentors, a little bit like the SLEs, deployed to support departments with their German, or either thinking about introducing German back into their curriculum. So that's what I'm about. That's what I do. What you see in the middle is QR code to my website, where I write quite a lot of blogs about language learning and teaching. I share lots of resources which are free. I think there's only about a couple of paid ones because it was quite a big job time-wise, but they are free. And also any kind of CPD offer that you might be interested in, you can find on that website. But let's go back to the session, what it is today all about, what we're going to be looking at, what we're going to be discussing. So the focus of the session today, as mentioned, is on questioning and the purpose of questioning. Now, we know that in languages classroom, lots of our questioning is to do with communication and conversation. So questioning for communicative purposes, being able to lead a dialogue and conversation in a target language. But not all of the questioning that we do is just to be able to communicate. Some of the questioning is also questioning for understanding, especially for understanding of concepts, such as grammatical concepts. So you're going to be looking also at types of effective questioning, how we can employ it in a classroom, and then specific examples of questioning in modern foreign languages classroom. So examples how you can structure your questions, especially when we're looking at checking for understanding of concepts. So I mentioned previously, all subject domains in the curriculum, without exception, rely on questioning. As mentioned, either questioning for understanding of grammatical concepts, or purely being able to communicate in a target language that we teach, being able to ask questions and also answer the questions. And languages are no different. So for our students to become fluent, they must evolve the ability to ask relevant questions and also to answer them appropriately in a target language. So it's not just about the answering of the questions, it's also about being able to ask the questions. So our students, based on obviously the GCSE specification, they need to be able to ask questions, not just to answer them. So if you think about possibly the role play, on the foundation paper, they have to ask one question. On a high, they have to be able to pose two questions. I think depending which exam board you do, also in the conversation section, I think for AQA, they also have to be able to ask questions. Okay, so it's really important in our subject. So for us, it is also important that we give them these opportunities. So the opportunities that we as teachers give them to ask and answer, in a target language, obviously coupled with the questions that we ask them in the first language, in order to underpin, as I mentioned before, the grammatical concepts and their linguistic knowledge. They can have a significant impact on the pace of their journey from the novice learner to the expert learner. And for us, it's also important to remember, if we talk about the language teaching at the secondary level, that our students are still novice learners, even at the end of their GCSE journey. So even if they end up with a grade 9, they are pretty much novice learners. They are not fluent in the language, obviously, unless we talk about the native speakers or somebody who gained the language, maybe living in, target country, and then target language country, and then coming to the UK and obviously sitting the exam. That's slightly different scenario. So Now is probably the time to think and pause a little bit. Why do we ask questions? Why do we ask our students questions? So if you would like to pop some ideas into the chat, that would be great. I'm going to give you maybe a few moments just to have a bit of interaction going. Why do we ask questions? What is the purpose of? We already mentioned communication, maybe concepts. What else? Why do we? To check for understanding. Any ideas? Why do we ask questions? Understanding and progress. Yeah, thank you, Emma. Thank you, Naya. Or Nia. Not sure how you pronounce your name. I don't want to say it wrongly. Any more ideas? Check what they don't know. Yes, very good. Encourage interactions and connection. Stimulate thoughts. Excellent. Some really good ideas. Okay. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Abdullah. Really excellent. To extend. Yeah, helps with motivation, extend their learning. Fiona, yeah, Lily, yeah, connection, which helps motivation to make them communicate. Miriam, excellent for connection. Fantastic. Okay, so practice language. Brilliant. All really good thought. Get them, hear themselves actually using the language, making the language real and purposeful. Some really good ideas. Okay, so my slide has gone stuck here now. Oh, there we go. I also think it is important that we plan questions. Now, I know that sometimes the spontaneity is important, especially in a communication. But when we're starting to get our students maybe to warm up to this kind of scenario, I think it's important that we also think about the questions that we're going to be asking them and who we asking what questions. You know, we know that, as many of you mentioned, this motivation, you know, and connection, and get them to interact and get them to, you know, to hear themselves. Obviously, that can be quite daunting in a first instance. So I think it's quite important sometimes that we think and plan our questions, you know, in terms of who we ask what questions, to break this kind of barrier of wanting to speak, you know, wanting to speak publicly within the classroom. So something to bear in mind. Yeah, it might be worth to consider, especially when we have early learners, to think about planning the questions and planning who we're going to ask what question, you know, until they get used to it. And then obviously sometimes the question develops from the communication. So in MFL, you know, obviously we do provide a lot of opportunities to ask and answer questions. Sometimes we're asking questions to elicit the process, so to understand not just the what, but also the why and how. Okay, so how do we know and why do you say it like this? So when we're looking at, you know, teaching our students, especially when we think about examinations, you know, extending the answers, why do we have to answer like that, and how can you extend it, and why did you put the word there, or why did you say it like this? Often it is also to retrieve information from memory and to strengthen it. And sometimes, you know, as we already mentioned, quite a few of you checking for understanding, checking that they understand a concept, you know, develop this deeper understanding of a concept. You know, as you said, many of you said, you know, to provide opportunities for output, you know, to highlight links to prior learning, to foster the similarities and differences between language 1 and language 2. Sometimes, especially when we're explaining the difficult concepts, it's important that we maybe draw on something which is familiar to them, you know, in their own language, or, you know, and similar, or sometimes showing the difference. And also to give them the opportunities to respond to unprepared situations in language 2, because that's often something they will have to deal with, especially, you know, in real life scenarios. You're not going to always have scripted questions and scripted answers. So how do we deal with a question which is unprepared in a situation that is unprepared? And I think, you know, as I mentioned already previously, it is so important that we establish this culture and the routines and expectations in terms of questioning early on in our learners' language learning journey. You know, so ensuring that the answering of the questions is shared as widely, you know, as possible within the classroom. You know, using the questions as a tool to guarantee that all students are participating. So how do we do this? Encourage them to take risks and to see, you know, mistakes as an opportunity to grow and to improve their relevant knowledge and skills. So making them comfortable about asking questions themselves, and this is I think what we often fight with, especially you know, from my experience in the classrooms in the UK, that, you know, we have often learners who don't feel confident enough to do this, who don't feel confident to take these risks because they think they have to be 100% accurate, they have to be correct. So having this kind of culture, you know, it's okay, I don't know the answer, I'm not sure about the question, and guiding them and giving them the support. So fostering this from early on, you know, from even primary school and year 7 if you're talking about secondary school. So I think that's very, very important. So when we come to the actual questioning, so we have to think about things, well, why are we actually questioning? You know, what are we asking and how are we forming our questions? What is important when we're planning our questions? So we must be aware that teaching languages is different to other subject domains. You know, the deep probing questions in geography classroom where students need to elicit, you know, advanced analytical responses is unlike the questioning in modern language classroom. Not least because the students are, you know, often expected to respond in a language which isn't their native one, but also some students may feel more reticent when responding to questions orally, you know, as we mentioned before, you know, particularly due to the lack of the knowledge and, you know, sometimes the embarrassment or, you know, the feeling that it might be viewed as not full. So, you know, it is very different type of questioning. And when we think about questioning, well, we have to, first of all, as teachers, as practitioners, think, well, what language am I going to use for my questioning? Am I going to use the first language, or am I going to use the second language? Am I going to use both of them? And am I gonna focus on using lots of cognates or maybe keywords for my students to answer the questions? You know, am I asking them to look up the cognates, look up for the keywords? Can you find out additional information? So these are the things we have to consider. And if you think about the way the exam changed recently, you know, we went from, or we are going from having question posed in a target language. Now the new GCSE is going to have the questions posed in a first language. Now, whether that's good or bad, you know, probably good for us because there's less pressure for the students trying to understand the questions, giving them more chance of being successful. But then again, in terms of, you know, having communication for real purposes, you know, they still have to be able to cope with questions in target language. So that's one thing we have to think about. We also have to think about when we're setting tasks, well, how many questions? You know, how many questions we're going to ask or how many questions the students need to answer. So for example, when we're using as a retrieval, you know, I'm using, I don't know, retrieval grids or retrieval pyramids, and you give them a time frame, you give them, I don't know, 5 minutes for your retrieval or do now task or whatever people call it these days. You know, how many questions do we want them to answer? And who chooses how many questions they answer and what questions they answer? Is it the student or is it the teacher? So we have to be careful here because some students might always just go for the easy options. And if you want to see, you know, how much students know, because some of you responded, well, we want to know what students know and don't know. Maybe it is wiser than for us to choose the questions. You have to choose maybe easier question. You need to choose maybe a little bit more difficult questions. So we have the challenge built in there, because often, you know, if we have students, even the smart students, so to say, or the high attaining students, you know, some of them can be a bit lazy, so they will go for the easy option. So it might be that it is us choosing, because obviously as a professional, we make a better choice. And obviously ensuring this variety and level of the challenge. Another thing we have to consider when we are posing questions or thinking about questioning is what type of questions are we asking? And again, this might be different to different classrooms and different classes. So depends what class you teach. If you have a lower attaining class, you might be focusing more on the what questions, you know, where you have the yes and no, you know, the true and false or who, or you have multiple choice. Now, I would like to just, you know, say a bit of caveat about multiple choice, especially when we talk about multiple choice quizzes. They are brilliant if they are set the right way. You know, we want to have questions and options which are incorrect but still plausible. So we want to give them something which still challenges the student, not to give them an answer which is, you know, obviously wrong, because then there is no challenge. And we can do this even, you know, with high attaining classes or lower attaining classes. We might want to ask the why and how questions, you know, so we want our students not just to say, for example, I don't know, what is your favorite food? And they say one word answer or just a simple response. We might want them to justify, to give an opinion. We might want them to give a reason. We might want to ask more open-ended questions where the students actually has to really elaborate. You know, how did you know? What do you think happened next? So these kind of things I think have to be often thought through. And it might be that if we are experienced teachers, and I'm not sure, obviously the scope that is here, we probably have teachers who have been teaching for quite a long time. We might have teachers who are new to the profession. So for an experienced teacher, it might be that you don't have to pre-plan it as much as maybe if you are an early career teacher. You still have to kind of think about things and script things a little bit, because the experience comes with the practice and with the years you teach. So these are things we have to really consider. Let me just quickly check my time. I often sometimes start off and then I don't realize that the time is running. Okay, so I quite like this quote from Steve Smith. You know, he says, much of our questioning is of a special type, okay, with the purpose of developing internalized competence with grammar, vocabulary, and ultimately fluency. So as mentioned, for us, this questioning is much, much different than when we compare it to other subject domains. And this is sometimes a problem when we think about, you know, our senior leadership teams, you know, and when we have generic CPD, okay, because that is often geared, you know, around other subject domains and is not as straightforward for us in terms of modern language classroom. So what strategies can we use? Obviously, reading aloud, focusing on phonics when practicing speaking. Pronunciation is so important. We can use prompts. We can give opportunities to bounce a response of a peer. We can use the think, pair, share activities, which give the more confident, you know, more confidence and heightens the accuracy of the response. So, you know, these can also mitigate, you know, against this reticence and embarrassment, you know, that, you know, some students might feel, and that's why they don't want to speak. Other strategies, well, let's have a look at the strategies a little bit closer now, because obviously, yeah, prompts, what does it mean? So this is, for example, one example what I mean with using prompts, okay? So there might be, obviously, sometimes a good reason to move to another student, okay? You know, sometimes it's a better strategy, and it may be, you know, that it helps the original student to get, you know, to the right answer through the questions which we provide, you know, prompts towards. So when we think about questioning and, you know, the cold calling, for example, which, you know, every school probably in the UK now uses, because it's kind of no opt-out, you know, how do you know that everybody knows if you're just asking the students who put their hands up? So using cold calling is one way to ensure that everybody's taking part. But using a student and seeing that they definitely don't know the answer, there's no point of insisting. It's obviously time then to move on to someone else. So what I mean using prompts. So for example, I might have a term and I want students to tell me the meaning of the term. So here we're looking at what does it mean. So can you tell me, for example, what zu Fuß gehen means, Ben? And that's obviously an example from German. And, you know, many of us probably counted, well, I don't know. So here we can use the prompting. We can use prompts to guide the student through trying to work out that meaning, because often students shut down and I don't know it, and that's it, end of it. So my response will be, you know, teacher, do you remember when we learned about sports in year 7 and we have had the word Fußball? Do you remember what that word means? And Ben will remember it means football. Okay, so, well, that is correct. So can you now work out what zu Fuß means? Okay, so if you know Fußball is football, what could be then Fuß? Okay, now we work out, okay, Fuß is probably foot, and they understand the high frequency verb gehen. They can then work out to go, to walk by foot. Okay, so this is what I mean, you know, with prompting. So rather than just take, well, I don't know, we can try to guide them through prompting, and this works quite well. Other strategies we can use through think, pair, share. For example, it's quite good when using concepts. So, you know, another strategy to avoid reticence or gaps in students' knowledge may be used, obviously, you know, to tackle this problem. So this strategy can be employed, I would say, when asking students to verbalize structures as deliberate practice. So, for example, if I just told the future tense in German using the verb werden plus infinitive, I might just ask the following questions. I might just say, for example, remind me of the structure of the future tense sentence we have been studying. What comes first? Ravis, you know, and Ravis will say, oh, first comes the conjugation of the verb werden. And then I would, you know, obviously praise Ravis for his response. I would just quickly ping pong to somebody else, and what comes after Ellie? And Ellie would say, well, then we have the extra information. Well, excellent. And can you then elaborate on what we mean with this extra information? And I will pick another student, for example, Eddie. Well, Eddie would say, if we were saying we were traveling somewhere, that will be an extra information. That could be, you know, how we went there, you know, so who we went there with, etc. I just realized there is a typo on travel, should be 1L. Well done, Eddie. So what finishes the sentence, for example, Olivia, and then we would have the infinitive at the end. So you all now have 15 seconds to work with your partner to obviously work out how to translate the sentence. So you could have this as a think pair share activity. You can quickly whiz through this questioning just to make sure that students know the construction of the past tense before you send them off to build their sentences. This could be done with a past tense, it could be done with conditionals, it could be with you know, subordinate clauses. So you want to, before you just send them off, okay, you want to ensure they know what they need to be doing. And this quick questioning, this quick fire questioning and asking students, you know, around the classroom will set up the activity really well, and there is more chances of obviously success as well. So I think this is again stiff. I'm not sure why is it not working. Looks like my cursor is not moving. Oh, there we go. Other examples of effective questioning. We already mentioned the cold calling. It's important that we give our students obviously the wait time. Another way I check for understanding and use questioning is the use of mini whiteboards, where you can instantly see what students know, what they don't know, asking them to say something better again, you know, because obviously maybe the first response was too basic or not as great. And as I mentioned in the previous think pair share. So direct questioning, you know, obviously when we talk about cold calling, teacher students chooses who answers the questions without the aid of hands up. And it's or by random approach. You know, we can use name generators. You could, you know, you could pre-plan who you're going to ask what. You know, thus you're creating obviously the culture in which every student expects to be questioned. You know, and you know, you're also raising the challenge, okay, for all. So I would say when you do cold calling, it's good really to use the teacher judgment, professional judgment and discretion when questioning. So knowing the class and students really well. You know, and this allows also for the tailoring of the questions asked, you know, so affords the opportunities to give the less confident students a confidence boost by maybe asking them a question which allows them to demonstrate their knowledge, you know, to be successful. And the teacher can then determine as well which students they need to push and challenge, as well as directing certain questions, you know, at particular students and questioning for the prior knowledge, maybe ritual practice. So types of effective questioning also includes teaching question words. You know, question words are extremely important. Okay, so teaching high frequency question words, which form an inseparable part of the communication. You know, teaching them more explicitly, maybe linking the question words with the types of responses. So for example, asking how many, okay, will require a number, so students can preempt, you know, okay, so it's asking you how many, we're looking for a number in the response. When I'm asking when, you know, this will require a time frame, so students know that they're looking for when, maybe day, maybe date, maybe season, maybe a specific time. You know, explaining to them and teaching them why, they will know that we require here a reason. So often using certain connectings like because, you know, so designing activities which require the students to formulate questions, you know, from the checking for understanding, your mini whiteboards with your multiple choices. So students get the answer right only if they understand the concept. So if you're using, you know, multiple choices. So for example, here, formulating questions, so you can give the students answer, and they have to give you what could be the possible question. So not just be asking questions to our students and expecting answers. We can sometimes give them answers and ask them to build a question. So that's why teaching them how to build a question is so important, okay, because they need to be able to ask questions too. So here, for example, zweimal, for people who might not be German, it means 2 times. So students have to then obviously ask the question. So for example, how many times per week do you play tennis or whatever? So they have to use the how many times. Another answer we might have is like, gestern habe ich Zahnschmerzen. Since yesterday I have a toothache. So the possible question would be then, you know, since when do you have a toothache? So they have to apply their knowledge how to build the questions. So the grammatical knowledge, okay, verb and subject need to be swapped, and then applying the correct question word. Okay. So other types of effective questions that we can use is obviously asking the hinge questions. You know, we mentioned the checking for understanding. This seems to be now going around the houses quite a lot in schools. Probing questions and process questions. Okay, so the probing is where you really ask them, okay, did you really understand it? I often use probing and process questions also as a part of retrieval practice if I do a revision retrieval practice. So we might have a sentence on the board which is in a past tense. And before we just translate it, I would say, well, which tense is there? Past. Well, how do you know it's past? Oh, because there is past participle. So which word is the past participle? And that will be, I could ask 6 to 7 students just looking at that one sentence. Okay, so they have to explain to me this, and that it reinforces the ability to build the tenses, because often I see that students struggle with the tenses, even though you taught them in year 8, they still struggle in year 10 or 11 or forget. Okay, so right, last bit, okay, negotiating meaning. So this refers to the ability, obviously, to work out what is being said through the process of checking and clarifying understanding. Often students, you know, sometimes give up. I don't understand. I don't know. So can you work out the words you know, and then the meaning of the what you don't know? Sometimes it's possible. So ability to figure out the meaning of linguistic input and then to manipulate it in the form of the modified output. So that means they can use it for themselves as well. We learn from language skills of our interlocutors by expanding our vocabulary and becoming aware of the new structures and forms. So that's quite important, negotiating meaning, you know, questioning. We become conscious of the gaps in our knowledge, and through the negotiation of the meaning, bridge those gaps. So students need to be able to bridge those gaps. So we get feedback on our language use and modify it accordingly to make ourselves understood. So questions help us to spot also, as you already mentioned, some of you in the chat, the misconceptions that you know, the students might have as well. And oops, this is again stiff. Why it's not moving? Still want to work for me. Oh, there we go. Okay, so just a little bit of references that I've been used to preparing the presentation and talk about it. Okay, really good book, if you don't know, is from James Maxwell, Making Every MFL Lesson Count. Okay, looking obviously at the Rosensheim Principles of Instruction. What I would say, when we look at more like a generic CPD, we always have to put it into context with our subject domain. We can't, and I'm pretty sure we know that as specialists, we don't just take something from the shelf and apply it regardless. We think about it, so how these things apply to our subject and how do we need to tweak them. As you can see, there were some examples of questioning and what I meant with the questioning, but there is lots of other resources on my website that you can access quite easily, which, as I said, predominantly are free. I think there's a couple of only to be paid for, but the rest is free. So if I look quickly at the chat now, I'm just conscious of the time because time goes quite fast when you talk. Okay, I think we've got about 10 minutes. So if I look at the chat and if I look at your questions, okay, do you have any tips or questions that elicit elements of grammar that are not tenses? Example, direct object pronouns. So that's quite interesting question. Direct object pronouns. I have not thought about that yet, to be honest with you. So I would have to think about it. Most of the eliciting the elements for the grammar is related either to tenses or looking at word order. You see, I mean, in German, for example, you know, when we talk about pronouns, when we talk about, you know, even nouns, it's always difficult in terms of gender, understanding gender, and then we're going into cases as well. So I don't necessarily teach that explicitly. It is more pop-up but I would expect possibly that, you know, that you would be teaching it more explicitly, you know, when it comes more like towards AS level, A level. I don't really teach grammar too heavily. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to answer this one. I would have to think about it and maybe come back to you. So it's Carla. Do you use the tag language also throughout the grammar teaching? Well, okay, I do it with my year 11s and they love it. Okay, because I can answer this question better. So sorry, Carla, I can't be more explicit, but I'm quite happy to go back to you if you message me, you know, and I can think about ways to give you answer to that one. If I move to Christiane, I use target language with my year 11s. We start usually with their first language. But once they get used to the routine that I use, I then swap into the target language. So again, you know, if you talk about tenses or word order, I would use and point and use gestures, and they quite like it. They learn new vocabulary. They don't always respond in German to me. They often respond also in English. So, for example, if we talked about the example of the grammar tenses, I would have a sentence and I would say, welche Zeitform ist das? Okay, so what time frame is it? I'm not sure, obviously not everybody speaks German here. So, welche Zeitform ist das? Gegenwart, Vergangenheit, Zukunft, Konditional. So I would use the terms, and students first would start with, maybe they would say present, and say, Gegenwart, and eventually they pick the words. So they will respond back to me with words they remember in target language. If they don't remember the word or they can't give me the explanation, they will speak in English, but I'll speak in German with them. I break it down, I point and show to what I mean. So if you talk about I don't know, Wortstellung, word order, I would point to what's been moved. So I would demonstrate it like that. But I am allowing them to respond in English because I want them to listen and to hear. So they're learning words like Frage, Antwort, okay, question, answer, through hearing me. And if I break things down and I model with hands and gestures and whatever, pointing to things, they understand quite a lot. And they say, oh, I actually understood it. And the first question I always have when I start my year 11 lesson is, are we doing German today? I said, well, we always do German. Oh, are we speaking German most of the time? Because there are lessons where I would use probably German for 90% of the lesson. They are quite tired afterwards, but yes, we do that. And there might be lessons where we use some English because if we're preparing for, you know, like a speaking exam and I need to explain how to address something, then I have to go, of course, into English because they're not able to understand all that explanation in a target language. Just trying to think, is there any more questions? Yeah, okay, yeah, so asking in German but responses in English are okay, yeah. But as I said, you know, because I'm using more of the target language, they are more willing to try to respond in German, even if it is sometimes anglicized German. So sometimes they translate literally, but they have a go. So I quite like it because I'm not looking at perfection. What I'm trying to get my classes to do, I want them to speak. And even if you make mistakes, you know, once they get to speaking and break this barrier of being scared to speak, then I might do the occasional correction. I don't correct everything because I don't want to discourage them. You know, if we overcorrect, then it will be like, okay, well, I'm making lots of mistakes. I don't want to speak. Okay, so I got Stanley here. Often in French and German, when you translate the sentence, they see the funny side, and with practice, they tend to get it. Yeah, pronouns have been practiced often. Yes. Yeah, well, it's always especially when you come to like pronouns and we teach like pets, for example, or objects, and then you suddenly have to refer to them as it, for example, and you have to say, well, sie and er, and they know that sie and er is she and he. So you got to, you know, I have to always go like, you got to think about it. If it's not a human, okay, it is translated as it. So you got to refer that, you know, you got to refer to that as it, but it is related to the gender of the noun. So this is something which is often difficult for, you know, for students in England, because obviously in English we like the genders and we like the cases. So it's quite difficult concept for them to understand. And also with the genders, they have to memorize the word with the gender. So if you don't, you know, with the article, if you don't learn it in the first instance, okay, and you can't possibly remember all of them, there will be always mistakes in that. But from the role of the examiner, for example, when we look at the writing, and I mark the writing and we do the standardization, they always encourage us to mark favorably, and they are not as harsh on the, on the genders. They are really harsh on tenses. Tenses need to be tackled, subordinate clauses need to be tackled. They expect the high frequency, prepositions and maybe, im Kino, ins Kino, in die Stadt, in der Stadt to be there, but they are not, too hard on the genders, getting them right, because that's not that easy, even for if you're not native speaker. I like that too. And year 11 is also good knowledge base for grammar. Yeah, I think with grammar and what language to use, whether you use target language, it depends on your class really. You know which classes you can do a little bit more experimenting and push for it. I think we all want to use as much target language as possible, but then if we use it wrongly, I think sometimes we can kill the joy of language learning, because you can see sometimes the students they look scared, and then you can put them off rather than encourage them. So it depends how well you know your class and your students. There's one more. Okay. To what degree can we correct our students, and in what level can we do that more? Thanks. I would say, obviously you don't want them to embed knowledge wrongly. Okay, I would maybe pick up on one thing which maybe is the most important. If they say something and there is 2 or 3 mistakes, maybe you can say, oh, this was a brilliant response, but just be careful with this. So I think it depends how you approach the correction, how you say it, how you put it across. And if I practice speaking with my year 11s and they speak, okay, and I circulate around and I hear some mistakes, I might not pinpoint every, but I might just say, well, just be careful, guys. I listened to this absolutely brilliant response. Just be careful with the word order here. Just be careful. That was the verb of movement. So what auxiliary verb do you need to use? So I think there is not a right way to say how many, to ask and how many to correct. I think it depends on the class. It's your feel as a teacher. You don't want to discourage them, but you don't want them also to learn things completely wrongly. So if you walk around and you hear similar kind of a mistake, you can draw it as a whole class. I say, guys, I've been walking around, some absolutely amazing work going around, but I have had quite a few of you using this, and that's not 100% right. So maybe it needs to be, and then you address it a whole class feedback rather than necessarily individual feedback. But I would say that depends, depends on the class, and yeah, on the situation, if that makes sense. Right, got a couple of more minutes, and then I think we will be, we will have to finish. Is there any more questions or any more comments? Anyone? Something just appeared in the chat. Let me just check. I like giving commands. Yeah, absolutely. With my year 7s registers, sit down, whatever, open your book, etc. Absolutely, that can be, because you're modeling as well. You're showing with your hands what it is you mean them to do. So I think that's sometimes the problem with the listening when you listen to a recording, because you're missing so much from facial expressions. You're missing so much with the gestures. Real life communication, you've got support mechanisms in a sense that you can gesture, you can point, you can show your facial expression. All of that is lost when you do recording. So I think that a lot of meaning can be deduced from having in live interactions. And, as you said, with your commands, you are showing, open your book, close your book, write, listen. So all of these, I would say straight away and as much as possible. So mini whiteboards might know 1, 2, 3, show me, and they already know it by heart. Yet I have never told them explicitly that command, because it's repetitive, isn't it? So yeah. So yeah, I think, is there any more? Let's have a look. So, well, thank you very much. Okay. Yes, the pronouns follow the same, yeah, as in English, yeah. So there is no changes. So I hope it was useful. Thank you so much for giving up your Saturday afternoon to join me. I hope it was useful. I hope that, it answers the questions. If there is any more, feel free to reach out. If you scan the QR code, it takes you to my webpage, or at the bottom, you've got email address. I'm more than happy, for you to contact me and to ask me more questions and go a little bit more in depth if you have any more questions. So it was absolutely lovely to be here today and to see so many people joining us on such a nice sunny afternoon. So thank you very much, and see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.